They called them tin cans, thin-skinned, lightly armed. The kind of ships meant to screen a fleet, not stand at the front of it. Yet on the morning of October 25, 1944, off the coast of the Philippines, a handful of these tin cans would do the unthinkable. They would turn and charge a Japanese battle fleet that outgunned them in every possible way. They shouldn't have survived. Many of them didn't. But in those desperate hours, the destroyers and escort carriers of a small American task unit, known simply as Taffy 3, would help decide the fate of a vast ocean war. And they would do it with torpedoes, smoke, cunning, and a kind of stubborn courage that even their enemies would stand in awe of. This is the story of the last stand of Taffy 3, how tiny tin cans fought battleships and lived long enough to help win the Pacific. Let's set the stage. It's late 1944. The Pacific War has turned against Japan. For years, the Japanese Empire had expanded almost unchecked. Pearl Harbor, the fall of the Philippines, the rapid sweep through the Southeast Asia, the humiliation of the Western colonial powers. But by 1944, that era is over. The Allies are coming back. The Americans, in particular, have been advancing step by bloody step across the Pacific. Guadalcanal, the Solomons, the Gilberts, the Marshalls, the Marianas. Each island they take becomes a forward base for ships and aircraft. Each base tightens the noose around Japan. The U.S. Navy now dominates the seas with a new kind of fleet. Fast carriers and their escorts, powerful battleships, swarms of aircraft that can strike hundreds of miles away. Japan, by contrast, is running out of fuel, out of planes, out of experienced pilots, and out of options. But it still has one resource, a surface fleet of heavy ships, battleships, heavy cruisers, torpedo-armed destroyers. And in October 1944, Tokyo decides to gamble almost all of it on one last gigantic blow. If they can't win the war, perhaps they can at least inflict such a shattering defeat that the Americans will pause, negotiate, or lose heart. The target? A name already burned into American memory: the Philippines. The Philippines, you see, are more than just islands on a map. For the United States, they are a matter of honor. In 1942, General Douglas MacArthur had been forced to retreat from the Philippines under Japanese pressure, leaving his soldiers behind with the promise, "I shall return." For Japan, the Philippines are a lifeline. From the south, Indonesia and the oil fields of Borneo and Sumatra, tankers still carry crude oil northward to fuel Japan's armies, navy, and industry. Those tankers must pass through the seas around the Philippines. If Japan loses control of these waters, its oil supply is strangled. Its fleet becomes a collection of steel hulks with empty fuel tanks. So, when the Americans begin their invasion of the island of Leyte in October 1944, both sides know this is not just another battle. This is the key to the whole war in the Pacific. To defend the invasion, the U.S. throws its greatest asset into the region, the Third Fleet under Admiral William Bull Halsey. Halsey commands powerful fast carrier groups, massive mobile airfields at sea that can sweep enemy ships from the ocean with a wave after wave of bombers, torpedo planes, and escorting fighters. The job of the Third Fleet is straightforward: find the Japanese fleet, crush it, and keep the landing beaches safe. But the U.S. has another fleet nearby as well, a separate force, Seventh Fleet, under Admiral Thomas Kinkaid, responsible for direct support of the amphibious landings. It consists of older battleships, cruisers, and something new: groups of small, slow escort carriers, nicknamed Jeep carriers. These are not frontline fleet carriers. They're merchant hulls converted into tiny aircraft carriers. Less armor, fewer planes, slower speeds. Their job is to provide close air support to troops ashore. bombing enemy positions, strafing ground targets, patrolling for submarines. They are not meant to duel battleships, but history has a way of ignoring what things are meant for. The Japanese response to the Leyte landings is ambitious and complicated. Their plan is called Shogo 1, Operation Victory Number 1. On paper, it's brilliant. In practice, it's desperate. The gist is this: throw almost every remaining major warship into a coordinated three-pronged assault that will converge on Leyte Gulf and annihilate the American invasion fleet. The Japanese divide their remaining strength into multiple forces. To the north, a decoy, a northern force made up largely of aircraft carriers. These carriers, however, are mostly empty. Japan has lost so many aircrews in previous battles that these flat tops are essentially bait. Large, dramatic targets meant to lure Halsey's powerful Third Fleet away from the invasion beaches. To the west, a southern force of battleships and cruisers is to move up from the south and attack via Surigao Strait. And in the center, the most dangerous of all, the center force, commanded by Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita. Kurita's center force is terrifying on paper. It sails from Brunei with some of the heaviest surface units in the Japanese Navy: battleships, heavy cruisers, light cruisers, and destroyers. Among those battleships is a monster, the Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, with 18.1-inch guns that can hurl shells weighing more than a ton. In terms of sheer tonnage of metal and firepower, Center Force is one of the most formidable surface strike groups assembled in naval history. Its mission: pass through the central Philippines via the San Bernardino Strait, swing down along the eastern coast of Samar, then fall upon the vulnerable American landing fleet in Leyte Gulf. If Kurita can break through, he might find dozens of troop transports, supply ships, and landing craft, many of them unarmed or lightly defended. One good massacre might not win the war, but it could be a disaster of such magnitude that America would not forget it for generations. The Japanese plan is bold, but like all complex plans, it depends on coordination, timing, and luck. And luck, as it turns out, is not on Kurita's side. As Center Force approaches the Palawan Passage, it blunders into a screen of American submarines. In a burst of torpedoes and explosions, 2 of Kurita's heavy cruisers are sunk, and a third is badly damaged. The admiral himself is thrown into the water and rescued. Shaken, Kurita presses on, but the damage is not just physical. The psychological blow is severe. American submarines, American aircraft. Where else might unseen enemies be waiting? Soon enough, the U.S. aircraft carriers of Halsey's Third Fleet find the center force and pounce. Wave after wave of carrier aircraft scream down upon the Japanese ships in the Sibuyan Sea. Bombs and torpedoes slam into steel hulls. The giant battleship Musashi, sister ship to Yamato, is set upon by dozens of planes. Struck repeatedly, she slows, floods, and finally capsizes, dragging over 1,000 crewmen to the bottom. After hours under attack, Kurita, believing he cannot break through, turns his battered force around, and for a moment, it seems the danger has passed. Reports fly to Halsey. The center force is retreating westward. Threat diminished. Halsey, always aggressive, sees an opportunity. The Japanese northern force of decoy carriers has been spotted to the north. If he takes the bait, he can destroy what remains of Japan's carrier strength, a tempting prize. He assumes that Kurita is out of the fight, that the battered center force is no longer a major threat, so Halsey takes his powerful fast battleships and fleet carriers and roars off to the north in pursuit of the Japanese carriers. The trap is working. But here's where that friction of war, that fog and confusion, starts to matter. Because Kurita has not gone home. After temporarily turning away, the Japanese admiral reconsiders. His losses have been heavy. but the mission remains. He turns his ships back east, slips through the San Bernardino Strait during the night, and emerges on the eastern side of the Philippines. And now, crucially, the American ships that might have met him in a battle of equals, Halsey's fast carriers and battleships, are gone. What stands in his way instead is something else entirely. In the pre-dawn darkness of October 25, 1944, off the eastern coast of Samar Island, the sea is deceptively calm. Here, spread out in a loose formation, operate several groups of tiny escort carriers and their protective screens of destroyers and destroyer escorts. They are collectively known as Taffys, a nickname derived from their radio call signs: Taffy 1, Taffy 2, and Taffy 3. Each Taffy is a baby task group, a handful of jeep carriers with a few dozen aircraft each, plus a thin screen of escorting ships. Taffy 3, under Rear Admiral Clifton Ziggy Sprague, not to be confused with another Sprague, Thomas Sprague, commanding nearby Taffy 1, is the one closest to San Bernardino Strait. Its job? Provide air support for the troops landing on Leyte and patrol against submarines. The ships of Taffy 3 are not expected to fight major surface actions. Their carriers, the likes of USS Gambier Bay, USS Fanshawe Bay, USS White Plains, and others, carry mostly aircraft armed with bombs, depth charges, and small rockets designed to hit land targets and submarines. Their destroyers, USS Hoel, USS Heermann, USS Johnston, and the smaller destroyer escorts, USS Samuel B. Roberts, USS Raymond, USS Dennis, and USS John C. Butler, are relatively lightly armored, designed to screen against submarines and perhaps skirmish with other light ships. These escorts are sarcastically, even affectionately, called tin cans, because their hulls are thin compared to big capital ships. A single hit from a battleship's broadside can blow them open like an empty can of food. But on this morning, no one on Taffy 3 expects to be trading broadsides with battleships. At least, not yet. Dawn breaks around 6 a.m. Pilots on the escort carriers of Taffy 3 are just finishing breakfast, readying for routine sorties over Leyte. On the destroyer USS Johnston, commanded by Commander Ernest E. Evans, the crew is settling into another day of escort duty. Evans is a Cherokee American officer, known to his men as a tough, no-nonsense leader with a flair for dramatic promises. When he had first taken command of the Johnston, he told his crew, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." No one had taken him up on that offer. Around the same time, lookouts on Taffy 3 ships begin to notice something odd. On the horizon to the northwest, where they expect nothing but open ocean, they spot shapes. Faint at first, smoky silhouettes against the growing light. At first, some assume it must be part of Halsey's Third Fleet, but then someone raises binoculars. Someone else adjusts a rangefinder. The shapes resolve. Tall pagoda masts, turrets, big ones. And then, the first shell splashes fall into the water. Huge columns of water, some of them not far from the American formation. The ocean around Taffy 3 erupts in fountains of white. The shells are enormous, 15-inch, 16-inch, 18-inch. This is not Halsey's fleet. Taffy 3 has stumbled into the path of Kurita's center force. The scene aboard Admiral Sprague's flagship, the escort carrier USS Fanshawe Bay, suddenly shifts from routine to crisis. Reports flood in. Enemy ships bearing northwest. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers. Gun flashes on the horizon. Shells landing, closer with each salvo. Sprague and his officers grasp the situation with sickening clarity. Before them is a massive Japanese surface fleet, largely unknown in exact composition but clearly containing battleships and heavy cruisers. Behind them, to the east and south, lie the vulnerable transports, the landing forces, the entire invasion system. And between those transports and this oncoming steel avalanche is them. Just Taffy 3, small escort carriers, each capable of about 18 knots at best, selected for their relative expendability, not their toughness. Destroyers and destroyer escorts with thin armor and limited main batteries. No heavy cruisers, no big gun battleships. The Americans are badly outmatched. Sprague has no illusions. If Kurita punches through here, the invasion fleet in Leyte Gulf could be ravaged. The losses, ships, men, material, could be catastrophic. There is no time to wait for help. No time to argue over which fleet is responsible. The Japanese are here now, and they are already firing. Admiral Sprague reacts quickly and decisively. First, he orders his escorts to make smoke. If they cannot outgun the Japanese, perhaps they can at least hide. Black, billowing clouds pour from the funnels of the destroyers and destroyer escorts as they race to lay a screen between the carriers and the enemy. Second, he orders his carriers to launch every available aircraft immediately. No time for fully armed, carefully briefed missions. Planes are to get into the air with whatever they can carry, or even with nothing but machine gun ammunition, to harass and confuse the enemy. Pilots sprint for their aircraft. Engines roar to life. On decks only a few hundred feet long, flight crews scramble to get planes into the air as fast as they can, sometimes launching in the teeth of incoming shell fire. Some planes take off armed with depth charges meant for submarines. Others have rockets or small bombs. A few, caught between arming cycles, launch with nothing but their guns and their wits. Their orders are simple, if vague. Find the Japanese fleet, attack it in any way possible, and keep it head down. But even as the first Avengers and Wildcats claw into the sky, the big guns of Center Force find their range. Shells begin landing among the carriers. The slow-motion race has begun. Picture the scene from the Japanese side. From the bridges of Kurita's battleships and cruisers, the sight ahead is one of opportunity. Instead of heavily escorted fleet carriers or strong battle lines, the Japanese see small carriers and flimsy escorts. Exactly the kind of prey they had hoped to find in Leyte Gulf. There's confusion, yes. Kurita's fleet had been bombed the day before. Communication is imperfect. He has lost some of his cruisers already. His formation is somewhat scattered, but what his officers can see is clear enough. The small American carriers are trying to flee east, dodging and weaving, as their tiny escorts throw up smoke. They look, in the eyes of some Japanese observers, almost pathetic. At 20 or 25 miles, battleships like Yamato and Nagato open fire, their guns elevated to maximum range. Huge shells scream through the sky and plunge down into the water, some close enough to drench the American decks with spray. It appears to be the beginning of a slaughter, and on paper, that's exactly what it should have been. Among the Americans, however, are men who have no intention of merely running away and dying tired. On the destroyer USS Johnston, Commander Ernest Evans sizes up the growing chaos. He receives orders, like the other destroyers, to support the smokescreen and protect the carriers as they flee. But Evans looks at the shells falling closer and closer. He considers the long odds of simply trying to run. The Japanese guns outrange them. Their battleships are faster than the escort carriers. If nothing more is done, the Taffy 3 carriers will likely be pounded to pieces in the open. Evans makes a decision that will enter naval legend. Without waiting for detailed instructions, he orders the Johnston to turn toward the enemy. Not away, toward. He will attack. For the crew of Johnston, the world swings hard to one side as the ship heels over, turning straight into the oncoming storm. Evans' intent becomes clear. He is going to charge a fleet of battleships and cruisers with a single destroyer. The Johnston can make over 30 knots, fast for a ship of her size. Her main armament, 5 5-inch guns and 10 torpedo tubes. 5-inch guns are useful against other destroyers or perhaps lightly armored cruisers, but against battleships and heavy cruisers they are pinpricks. Torpedoes, however, are another story. At close range, a spread of well-placed torpedoes can cripple or sink even the mightiest battleship. Evans knows this. He also knows that to get his torpedo attack into effective range, he will have to pass through a hail of enemy fire. Over the intercom and by word of mouth, the order spreads. On your battle stations, we're going in. Some sailors think it must be a joke. Others feel an icy clarity. There is fear, of course, but there is also a kind of grim pride. Evans had told them that Johnston would be a fighting ship. He's making good on that promise. As Johnston charges through the smoke and into clearer waters, she emerges into a view that seems almost impossible. On the horizon, and drawing closer, are the silhouettes of an entire Japanese battle fleet. They are huge. Some officers would later recall being stunned by the sight. Tall pagoda masts, stacks, multiple turrets. Someone identifies a Congo-class battleship. Others see heavy cruisers, their turrets swinging. And even as Johnston closes the range, the Japanese are already firing. Shells bracket the charging destroyer, throwing geysers of water into the air around her. One hit, just one, from a battleship's main battery could gut the ship. Evans orders a smoke screen, using both smoke generators and zigzag maneuvering to disrupt the Japanese gunner's aim. Johnston darts and weaves like a frantic animal trying to avoid a predator's jaws. At around 10 miles, then 8, then 7, the ship shudders under near misses. Fragments slash the decks. At about 10 minutes into the charge, a large shell from a Japanese cruiser finally finds its mark, smashing into Johnston's superstructure. The blast rips through the ship, killing and wounding many. The forward fire control radar is knocked out. Communications suffer. Evans himself is wounded, shrapnel tearing into his body. Some accounts say he was left with fingers missing, clothes shredded. He refuses to leave the bridge. They must keep going. At around 6 miles from the nearest heavy enemy ship, a distance that now feels like arm's length, Evans gives the order to launch torpedoes. Johnston looses a full spread. 10 fish streaming out toward the Japanese line. Immediately, Evans orders a turn away, laying more smoke, trying to escape the likely return fire once the Japanese track the torpedo's origin. A few minutes later, massive geysers and explosions erupt around one of the nearest Japanese heavy cruisers, the Kumano. Torpedoes slam into her bow, crumpling steel and ripping open compartments. Kumano is badly damaged, her bow nearly blown off, and she staggers out of line, bleeding speed and flooding. One destroyer, one torpedo salvo, one heavy cruiser effectively put out of the battle. The Japanese attention snaps to this brazen attacker. Johnston now comes under even heavier fire. Japanese cruisers and battleships rake her with shells. One blast kills many on deck. Another disables part of her propulsion. The bridge, the brain of the ship, is shattered. Steering is shifted to aft controls. Communications rigged by runners and shouted orders. The destroyer is hurt, badly. But Evans refuses to quit. He swings Johnston around again, seeking new targets, firing her little 5-inch guns as fast as they can be loaded. The crew begin to aim at the superstructures of Japanese cruisers, hoping to knock out their fire control, their rangefinders, their guns. Spotters later testify to seeing shells from Johnston's guns striking the upper works of heavy cruisers, Chikuma, and others, starting small fires, knocking out minor systems. Every little disruption counts. And while Johnston dances and fights, she is not alone. Back with Taffy 3, Admiral Sprague realizes with astonishment what Johnston has done and what it is accomplishing. He cannot in good conscience order all of his escorts to do the same. But he can, at the very least, coordinate. He orders 3 destroyers to form a more organized counterattack: USS Hoel, USS Heermann, and the smaller destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts, along with others that will join in as they can. Like Johnston, they will sacrifice their relative safety for a chance to blunt the Japanese advance. Captain Leon Kintberger on USS Hoel and Lieutenant Commander Robert W. Copeland on USS Samuel B. Roberts both face the same cold logic as Evans. Their lightly armored ships are not built to face capital ships at close quarters. Yet that is exactly what is needed. Their torpedoes are their best hope. They turn in. USS Hoel charges into the fray, pushing through smoke and splashes. Like Johnston before her, she comes under heavy fire almost immediately. The sea around Hoel boils with near misses. Shell fragments howl like angry bees across the decks. At around 9,000 yards, just over 4 miles, Hoel looses her first salvo of torpedoes against the nearest battleships. Then, pressing still closer, she fires another spread at a heavy cruiser. Torpedo wakes fan out across the sea. Some are detected. Japanese ships turn away or weave. At least one of Hoel's torpedoes may have contributed to damage or near misses that force Japanese ships to maneuver, temporarily disorganizing their formation. But the cost is brutal. Shells slam into Hoel. One hit knocks out her engineering spaces. Another wrecks gun mounts. Flooding, fire, and exploding ammunition turn compartments into hellscapes. Still, Hoel continues to fire as long as any gun can be worked. As her list grows and power fails, the crew keeps one 5-inch gun operating manually, using improvised communication to relay targets. Eventually, the damage is too great. Hoel slows to a crawl, then comes to a stop. Listing heavily, riddled with holes, she finally rolls and sinks beneath the waves. Of the approximately 327 men aboard, only around 86 will survive the day. But in dying, Hoel has done something vital. She has forced the Japanese to maneuver, to turn their bows toward oncoming torpedoes, to halt or slow their advance. Each minute bought is another minute for the escort carriers to run, and for aircraft to keep hitting the attackers. Then there is USS Samuel B. Roberts. She is not even a full destroyer, but a destroyer escort. Smaller, slower, less heavily armed. Her crew calls her the Sammy B. When the battle begins and Copeland hears the call for attacks, he knows what that means, but he also knows what his ship is. A destroyer escort is intended to hunt submarines and provide anti-aircraft fire. It is not designed to charge battleships. Copeland gathers his crew and tells them the situation plainly. Later, survivors would recall his words, "We're making a torpedo run. The outcome is in doubt, but we will do our duty." On the bridge or down in the engine rooms, men quietly process what that likely means. They realistically expect to die. Some slip small personal objects, photos, trinkets, into their pockets. Then the Sammy B turns toward the Japanese fleet and accelerates. Samuel B. Roberts pushes past her supposed maximum speed. Her boilers strain. The wakes streaming off her sides stretch out and flatten as she makes over 28 knots, far beyond her design. Her bow plows into the whitecaps as she heads straight at a group of Japanese heavy cruisers. Her main battery is just 2 5-inch guns, but those guns are fast-firing and very accurate. As she closes to around 10,000 yards, she begins to shoot. Her first targets are the superstructures of Japanese cruisers, control towers, rangefinders, bridges. Her gunners pour rapid, accurate fire into the upper works of ships like Chokai and Chikuma. plumes of smoke and flame begin to rise from those distant hulls. One American observer later compared Sammy B's fire to a buzzsaw. At about 4,000 yards, just over 2 miles, Copeland orders torpedoes launched. Samuel B. Roberts only carries 3 tubes, but that is 3 chances. They fan out toward their targets. One may have contributed to damage on a cruiser that is already under fire from multiple directions. But again, perhaps the greatest impact is not the explosions themselves, but the reactions they cause. Japanese ships turn away, zigzag, break formation to avoid the spreads. The spear point of the center force, which had been driving hard toward the escort carriers, is now blunted, twisted, and confused by a handful of tiny ships charging suicidally into its teeth. As Sammy B continues to fire, the Japanese begin to return the attention, with interest. A heavy cruiser opens up with its 8-inch battery. Shells rain down around the American destroyer Escort. Some find their mark. One hit tears into the ship near the waterline, flooding compartments. Another shatters part of the topside, killing and wounding men on the guns. Still, the gunners keep firing, their arms bloody, faces streaked with soot and sweat. Shell casings clatter on the decks as they are flung aside. Copeland and his officers coordinate targets as best they can. They are punching far above their weight, and for a brief time, incredibly, they are winning. But quantity has a quality of its own. More Japanese guns find the range. More shells strike Samuel B. Roberts. Holes open along the hull. Fires break out. The list grows. At some point, the ship's back is essentially broken. The structure is so damaged that she begins to sag. Copeland gives the order to abandon ship. As she slowly rolls over and sinks, the Sammy B leaves behind a legend. A destroyer escort that charged heavy cruisers, outshot them, and died in the attempt. Later, historians will call her the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship. While the destroyers and escorts slash into the vanguard of the Japanese fleet, the escort carriers of Taffy 3 are running for their lives. Fleeing eastward, they twist and turn under heavy shell fire. USS Gambier Bay, one of the carriers, cannot outrun the larger, faster enemy ships closing in. Japanese heavy cruisers focus on her. Shells walk closer and closer up her wake, finally striking home. Gambier Bay begins to take on water and lose speed. As her captain tries to maneuver as best he can, her thin hull cannot absorb the beating. Eventually, fires and flooding overwhelm her. She becomes the only American aircraft carrier sunk by gunfire from enemy surface ships in World War II. Her crew abandons ship into the shark-infested seas. Other escort carriers take shell hits as well. USS Kalinin Bay is repeatedly struck by shells and even narrowly escapes torpedoes. One torpedo actually passes beneath her, failing to explode properly due to depth set for deeper draft ships. These jeep carriers have no armor to speak of. They survive purely by luck, speed, and the chaos sown among the Japanese. And above all this carnage, in the sky overhead, another critical battle is playing out. The airplanes of Taffy 3, joined by aircraft from nearby Taffy 2 and Taffy 1, swarm over the Japanese fleet. These are not ideal anti-ship strike packages, carefully assembled with armor-piercing bombs and torpedoes. Many of the planes are loaded with whatever they happen to have on the racks when the alarm came. Some Avengers carry depth charges. Others have light bombs meant for ground targets. Fighter pilots in Wildcats and Hellcats find themselves attacking heavy cruisers and battleships with nothing more than machine guns and small rockets. Yet, they attack. Dive bombers roar down on the pagoda masts and crowded decks of Japanese cruisers, dropping their improvised ordnance with lethal precision. Depth charges and 250-pound bombs may not penetrate a battleship's armored deck, but they can wreck anti-aircraft guns, kill crew, start fires, and force evasive maneuvers. Pilots make multiple passes, sometimes returning to the carriers to rearm if they can, other times a detail that borders on the unbelievable, pressing dummy runs even when out of ammunition, just to keep the enemy guessing, heads ducked, and gunners off balance. Radio chatter from the air is a mix of terror, gallows humor, and fierce determination. One pilot, out of ammunition and bombs, reports, "I'm going to make a dry run. Maybe I can scare them a little." Another calls out urgently as he dives on an enemy cruiser, "Scratch one flat top. No, wait, that's one cruiser burning." The psychological effect on the Japanese is significant. From Kurita's perspective, his fleet is now under almost continuous air attack from multiple directions. The sky is thick with aircraft, and his ships are being hit again and again. He cannot know that many of those planes are lightly armed or even empty. What he sees is a relentless air assault, precisely what he had feared when planning this venture. In the middle of this chaos, the Japanese center force begins to fracture. Some heavy cruisers like Chikuma, Chokai, and Suzuya are hit by bombs, torpedoes, or crippled by near misses and the cumulative damage from American destroyers and aircraft. Chokai is severely damaged, possibly by bombs from aircraft and a catastrophic explosion in her own torpedoes, and must be abandoned. Chikuma takes repeated hits, eventually falling behind the main fleet, crippled, until a final airstrike finishes her off. Suzuya, though not directly hit by a bomb, suffers from near misses that jolt her torpedoes. A chain reaction of explosions wrecks her hull, forcing abandonment. What had been a solid blade of steel at the start of the morning is now chipped and bent. Kurita's battleships, including Yamato, find themselves repeatedly needing to turn away from torpedo threats, real or perceived, from both sea and air. Each turn robs them of speed and coherence. Each emergency maneuver pushes them farther from their original course toward Leyte Gulf. Let's step back just for a moment and consider the grim arithmetic of that morning. On one side, the Japanese center force. 4 battleships, Yamato, Nagato, Kongo, and Haruna. 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 11 destroyers. They mount dozens of large caliber guns, backed by formidable secondary batteries and torpedo tubes. On the other side, Taffy 3 at the moment of crisis. 6 slow escort carriers, 3 destroyers, 4 destroyer escorts. Around 450 aircraft across all the Taffys supporting the battle, many armed piecemeal. In pure tonnage and firepower, the matchup is absurd. Yet by mid-morning, the outcome is no longer obvious. The Japanese have sunk the escort carrier Gambier Bay, the destroyers Hoel and Johnston, and the destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts. American casualties are heavy. Men are in the water. Oil slicks spread across the surface. But the Japanese have suffered as well. Several cruisers knocked out, their formation scattered, and their advance repeatedly checked. Most importantly, time has passed. Every minute that Kurita spends fighting these tin cans and jeep carriers is a minute lost from his mission to destroy the invasion fleet in Leyte Gulf. The Americans, despite being outgunned, are fighting a delaying action of staggering effectiveness. And then, slowly, something begins to change. Not in the positions, not in the number of ships, but in Kurita's mind. From the bridge of his flagship, Kurita faces a deeply confusing tactical picture. His ships are under heavy, seemingly unending air attack. He has already lost several cruisers in the days and hours before. His enterprise is supposed to be a decisive strike at the American invasion fleet. But instead of defenseless transports in Leyte Gulf, he has found unexpectedly tough opposition from escort carriers and destroyers. He was told Halsey's main fast carriers and battleships were in the area. Yet, they are nowhere to be seen. Instead, he is being harassed by what appear to be multiple carrier air groups, suggesting that Halsey may not be far away. On top of that, communication with the other Japanese forces, Southern Force in Surigao Strait, and the Northern Decoy Carrier Group, is fragmentary, delayed, or outdated. The Southern Group has, in fact, been annihilated earlier that morning in a classic battleship ambush at Surigao Strait. But Kurita does not fully grasp this in the moment. All he knows is that his own casualties are mounting, his fuel is limited, and he is not entirely sure what he is facing. He also does not want to throw away the last major battleships of the Imperial Japanese Navy in a hopeless brawl. The very thing that has made the Americans so aggressive in their use of aircraft, their numerical and logistical superiority, is the shadow looming over his decision. If he pushes deeper toward Leyte Gulf, he risks sailing even closer to whatever forces Halsey might have detached. He asks himself, is this battle, this further risk, worth the potential gain? At some point before noon, Kurita reaches his conclusion. Despite having the gunfire advantage, despite having driven Taffy 3 back, he decides to break off. The center force begins to turn away, slipping back into the haze and smoke from which it had emerged. The Japanese fleet retreats. For the sailors of Taffy 3, the shift is almost surreal. One moment, the horizon is dominated by looming enemy silhouettes and towering shell splashes. The next, the firing slackens. One by one, radar operators and lookouts report the Japanese are turning away. It is not an ambush, not a trick. It is a retreat. The cost for Taffy 3 has been horrific. Escort carrier Gambier Bay sunk. Destroyers Hoel and Johnston sunk. Destroyer Escort Samuel B. Roberts sunk. Hundreds of American sailors are now bobbing in the sea, clinging to debris or life rafts, surrounded by fuel oil and, in some places, sharks. Many will spend dozens of hours in the water before rescue can arrive. Some will not survive that long, but the invasion fleet in Leyte Gulf, the transports, the support ships, the soldiers, they are untouched by Kurita's guns. The disaster that might have been is averted. And astonishingly, this unbalanced battle, this desperate last stand by tin cans and jeep carriers, has played a major role in stopping one of the last great sledgehammer blows of the Imperial Japanese Navy. After the battle, when the scale of what had happened sinks in, emotions in the American command run high. Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, who commanded Taffy 3, is exhausted but furious. He had fought for his life with minimal support while believing, incorrectly, that Halsey's powerful Third Fleet battleships and carriers were guarding the San Bernardino Strait. In reality, Halsey had taken almost all of his strength northward to pursue the decoy carriers. Sprague sends a message later, biting in its brevity. Where is Task Force 34? The world wonders. That last phrase, the world wonders, was meant to be meaningless padding, a kind of code noise. But it is not properly removed from the dispatch he receives. It reads like a reproach. For Halsey, the battle off Samar would become an uncomfortable subject. His decision to pursue the northern force and leave the San Bernardino Strait uncovered almost resulted in catastrophe. Some historians argue that he should have anticipated Kurita's return. Others say that Kurita's brief retreat the day before and the lure of Japanese carriers made his decision understandable. What is clear is that when Kurita's center force fell on Taffy 3, Halsey was too far away to influence the initial hours of the engagement. By the time Third Fleet aircraft began to reach the scene in large numbers, the tiny ships of Taffy 3 had already fought most of the desperate fight on their own. On the Japanese side, reactions are equally complex. Some officers after the war admit to being mystified by Kurita's decision to retreat. They argue that his battleships and remaining cruisers still had the gunpowder and ammunition to press on, that a massacre of American transports in Leyte Gulf might have been possible. Others defend him, pointing to the persistent air attacks, the loss of cruisers, the confusion about American forces, and the risk of annihilating the last capital ships of Japan in an operation whose broader strategic prospects were, realistically, nil. Kurita himself would later say that he had achieved a tactical victory, sinking several American ships, but that the strategic situation had made further action senseless. But even he seems to have been haunted by the decision. It's not difficult to see why. He had been sent on a mission many would later call suicidal. He had been told to break into the heart of the American invasion force while facing superior air power and uncertain opposition. He had done his best, and then he had been checked, stymied, not by the full might of Halsey's fast carriers, but by a handful of tin cans and a screen of escort carriers that by all rights should have been easy prey. One imagines it was not easy for a Japanese admiral, steeped in notions of decisive battle and martial valor, to reconcile that outcome. What gives the battle off Samar, and specifically the last stand of Taffy 3, its enduring power is more than just the numbers or the tactics. It is the human dimension. Think of Commander Ernest Evans on the smoking bridge wing of USS Johnston, wounded, his ship crippled, still urging his crew to keep firing. Think of Lieutenant Commander Copeland on the Sammy B, telling his men that the outcome is in doubt but that duty requires they charge anyway. Think of the pilots who launched in underarmed planes, who attacked battleships with depth charges and then made empty, dry runs to keep the pressure up. Think of the sailors in the engine rooms and ammunition hoists, sweating in hellish heat while shells slammed into their thin hulls. When Terzani, a war correspondent decades later, spoke of wars being decided not just by strategy, but by the courage of ordinary people in extraordinary moments, he could have been thinking of men like these. Before the battle, the American destroyers and destroyer escorts were widely, almost jokingly, called tin cans. After Samar, that nickname would carry a different weight. They were flimsy, yes, they were vulnerable. But in the hands of determined crews, they were also incredibly dangerous. The official citations that followed the battle off Samar reflect that. Commander Ernest Evans of USS Johnston was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. His citation notes that he unhesitatingly hurled his vessel into action against vastly superior forces, and continued fighting until the ship was dead in the water and he himself disappeared into the sea. Samuel B. Roberts' skipper Copeland received the Navy Cross, as did many of his men. Hoel's captain and crew were similarly honored. In the years after the war, survivors would gather and tell their stories of the terror, the confusion, the moment-to-moment choices. Some would admit they thought they were going to die the moment their ships turned toward the enemy. Others said they simply focused on their jobs and let the enormity of it all sink in only after the fact. One sailor from Samuel B. Roberts later summarized his feelings with stark simplicity. "We were just doing what we were trained to do. We didn't have time to be heroes." Yet that is precisely how history remembers them. Strategically, the wider Battle of Leyte Gulf, of which Samar was one part, spelled the effective end of the Imperial Japanese Navy as a significant fighting force. The decoy northern force was mauled by Halsey's carriers, with the last operational Japanese fleet carriers sunk or crippled. The southern force was crushed in Surigao Strait, in what became the last battleship versus battleship engagement in history. And Kurita's center force, although it survived in part to fight another day, never again enjoyed such concentrated strength or such an opportunity. After Leyte Gulf, Japan's navy would be largely confined to port or short, desperate sorties. Fuel shortages, air supremacy lost, and the relentless advance of Allied forces meant that its ships could no longer shape the war in the way they once had. The Philippine oil lifeline was effectively cut. Japan's strategic situation, already dire, became almost hopeless. From there, the story of the Pacific War turns to Iwo Jima, Okinawa, firebombings, and atomic bombs. But like a pivot in a long, grinding story, Samar and Leyte stand at a key inflection point. The last chance for a decisive naval victory had come and gone, and it had been stopped, in no small part, by the audacity of a few small ships. There is also an interesting, more subtle legacy to Taffy 3's stand. Modern naval warfare has often been described as the realm of big, expensive platforms, capital ships, supercarriers, nuclear submarines. But Samar is a reminder that under the right circumstances, smaller ships, properly handled, can have an impact far beyond their size. The destroyers and escort carriers of Taffy 3 were never meant to be the stars of a major fleet engagement. Yet because of their commanders' willingness to act quickly, decisively, and aggressively, they turned into the one thing the Japanese hadn't planned for: a swarm of small, agile, and deadly opponents. By closing the distance, by launching torpedoes, by making every gun count, they forced a superior enemy to rethink its assumptions and ultimately abandon its objective. In a way, Samar foreshadows later debates about asymmetric warfare at sea. Can smaller, cheaper platforms, missile boats, fast attack craft, drones, pose a serious threat to large, powerful warships? The answer, history suggests, is yes. If the people who command them are willing to take risks, and if those risks are backed by courage and a bit of luck. Today, if you visit memorials or read the accounts of those who were there, you'll hear again and again the same themes: shock, disbelief, terror, and pride. An American officer once said of Samar, "We were caught with our pants down, and we pulled them up fast." It's perhaps a crude way of putting it, but not entirely wrong. Taffy 3 should have been nothing more than a speed bump in front of the Yamato and her sisters. Instead, they became a brick wall. The last stand of Taffy 3 is not a story of flawless planning or overwhelming power. It's messy, it's painful. It's full of smoke, confusion, miscommunication, and the kind of errors and improvisations that define real battles. But that's precisely what makes it so compelling. Because amidst that chaos, you can see individual choices, by Evans, by Sprague, by Copeland, by anonymous gunners and machinists, that mattered. Choices that collectively bent the arc of the battle, and with it, a part of the war. As the historian Samuel Eliot Morison wrote of these events, "In no engagement in its entire history has the United States Navy shown more gallantry, guts, and gumption than in those 2 morning hours between 7:30 and 9:30 off Samar." Coming from a man who chronicled the entire U.S. naval war in World War II, that's saying something. In the end, the legacy of Taffy 3 is more than just a tactical tale. It is a reminder that on some days, in some battles, the outcome turns not on who has the bigger guns, but on who is willing to turn toward the fire when every instinct says to run. On October 25, 1944, a handful of tin cans decided to turn, and the echoes of that decision helped shape the last year of the Pacific War. If you enjoy stories like this, where small ships defy the odds and forgotten battles reshape history, consider subscribing. There are many more chapters like Samar, tucked away in the archives. Hidden moments of courage, miscalculation, and chance that change the course of wars and empires. And if there's another battle, commander, or campaign you'd like to see covered in this kind of deep dive narrative, let me know in the comments. Until next time, thanks for watching. And remember, in history, As at Samar, never underestimate the underdog.